Hey, I am so glad this worked out. Thank you so much for doing this for us and with us. It's really just amazing. Like, I was looking for somebody to do this. I had sent out several requests to people to do this interview, and then one of our FEM members, Saka, drew the connection for us, and here you are. So thank you so much for being here. I gave everybody in the group your brief bio, but I would love for you just to share a little bit about your background and who you are.
Sure. Well, I didn't hear what you
Oh,
said, so if I
you
repeat
did?
something.
Oh, yes. Oh, no, no. I shared what you gave me. So, yeah, repeat it. People are
Okay.
just jumping on. So, yeah.
Sure. Yeah, so I've been in the environmental field for quite a while, about 10 years doing consulting. I have degrees in hydrology and watershed science. And, professionally, I've been dealing with PFAS for about the past year now, since it's just been um, just blowing up in West
Yeah.
Michigan here. It's just impacting a lot of people.
Mhm.
I actually changed employers to be more involved with it, to go with a company who was doing more than my previous
Mhm.
company.
Oh, wow.
And so
So this is your
yeah,
thing.
just yeah, I'm knee deep in it.
Wow.
So it's just really close to my heart, and I see a lot of people very fearful about it.
Mhm.
And I think that the media doesn't necessarily help. They give you some,
Mhm.
information, but what do you do with that
Mhm.
information besides be
Mhm.
fearful? So I just want to help with that. My own
Mhm.
family, other friends and stuff, they're always just like, you hear it on the radio now every week.
Mhm.
It's everywhere. You hear about it all the time, and
Mhm.
what do you do about it? So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about with you
I
today.
love it. That's perfect. You also you fit really well with the Fem family because of your other passions. So share about your little, or I don't know if it's little, your farm and just like your hobbies.
Yeah, okay. So, when I'm not fighting PFAS, I like to hang out with the animals. We live on a small farm here, north of Grand Rapids, about half an hour. We have, right now we have sheep, donkeys, and chickens, and during the summer we also had pigs and geese, and turkeys, and we raised them. We sold them at the Rockford Farmers Market, and we do everything naturally the best we
Hmm.
can, and we try to, that's one thing I'll try to touch on later, but something I think people spend a lot of time avoiding things that are hazardous, but I think that a similar way of avoiding them is just going towards things that are beneficial to you.
Hmm.
And I think that's maybe a slightly different take on a way to live.
Yeah. I
So that's what we try to do.
Yep, I love that. We talk so much about that in this group and just with clients about like it's not necessarily about removing things, it's about adding in things that are super nourishing. And just the more you do of that, the less there's space for the other
Hmm.
stuff. And I love that. Um,
Hmm.
so I didn't realize that you are at the Rockford Farmers Market. I'll have to check you out there.
Yeah, we were there last year, and I don't know whether we'll be
Okay.
back this year. That was it might have been a little bit
Yeah.
too much of something to bite
Yeah.
off. So whether we were there or not, we'll still be doing it as a homestead
Okay.
scale, where we can raise our own food. Some percentage of it
Yeah.
anyway. It's not necessarily 100% by any means, or even 50%, or even
Yeah.
30%. But we try to raise most of our own
Yeah.
meat and tap the maple trees, and we do some of our own food, and we try to raise it in a healthy way. We raise the pigs in the woods, and they're fenced in, so they're not running all over. But we do try to raise healthy animals.
That's amazing. I love that. So, even though we're talking
Mhm.
about the PFAS crisis, if you have questions
Mhm.
about farming, you can feel free to drop them in and we'll see if we can get to them.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's dive in deep. So, I want to
Hmm.
know like, okay, clearly, as you mentioned, this is in the news. People are afraid, they are freaking out about it. It's in there, like you said, there's not a lot of solutions that are readily available. So, can you just give us some
Hmm.
background on what this is? Like, what are we dealing with? Because there's some people, like, even though I did a
Hmm.
lesson on this in the modules, not everybody's worked through those. So, if we can just start at like the ground zero and just tell them what is it, what does it mean to you?
Hmm. Yeah. So PFAS, if we just step back here and just to make sure everyone's on the same page, going, back to the beginning, it's a name for a group of chemicals, a family of chemicals. They're the perfluoral alkyl substances and the polyfluoral alkyl substances. and we just call them PFAS for short because who wants to say that long name?
Right?
Um, and they've been invented in about the 1930s and 40s, and they've just been used in everything since then. They are extremely useful chemicals. They're oil resistant, they're water
Hmm.
resistant, they're heat resistant, um, and for those properties, they're fireproof. A lot of times they're used in everything. Like it's actually harder to find stuff they're not used in.
Hmm.
And so there's about 3,000 of those chemicals now in that family, and more being invented all the time. Um, and they're considered an emerging contaminant. So even though we've known about them for a long time,
Hmm.
they just haven't been studied in the same degree that other contaminants, like petroleum contaminants, have been studied.
Okay. Yeah. Um, so like the 3,000 in that family, that's where we see like all the variations of PFAS, PFOS, like fo, like all of those things, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and we can go into that a little bit
Okay.
more, but so PFAS, this is good. So these are just definitions to get out of the
Yeah.
way, so we don't have to talk about them
Yep.
later. So PFAS is it's the large family, it's
Okay.
the biggest
Okay.
group. And then of those, everyone pronunciates a little bit differently, but the next one I call
Okay.
PFOS, which is PFOS. And so of the 3,000 PFAS, two of them have been the most studied, and those are PFOS and PFOA.
Okay.
That's PFOS and
Hmm.
PFOA. And everyone pronunciates differently, but PFOA and PFOS.
Okay. Awesome. So so why are people freaking out? Can you share with us some of the health effects of the PFAS?
Yeah, and that's something that, there's been some studies on PFOA and PFOS, and the rest of them people don't know a
Right.
lot about. But the ones they do know about PFOS and PFOA are that they do cause various cancers, hormone disruptors, they disrupt the immune
Hmm.
system, and they have reproductive
Mm.
problems. And it's been assumed that because they're similar in a class of family with the other ones, that um, any of the 3,000 are probably not great for us. They probably have similar problems.
Hmm. So the people that are coming forward, do you know much about the woman that came forward and kind of brought it to the attention? Like, do you know much about the story? Because I know that got a lot of immediate attention. Can,
Yeah, so there's a couple ways that it came to the
okay.
media's attention, and I think that's one of the
Okay.
ways. And um, it's there's the way they found the House Street dump over here. There that one is more of a roundabout
Mm,
way, um, and there it was almost accidentally
mm,
discovered.
interesting.
And so that's with the Wolverine. It's yeah, there's a large. Most I think I heard that you said most of your people who are listening are from
Yes.
West Michigan
Yeah.
or Michigan in
Yeah.
general. Yeah, so they're aware of the Wolverine PFAS here in West
Hmm.
Michigan, focusing in the Rockford area,
Hmm.
and there's many different subsites. They're not all related to just the main site in Rockford, but there's many subsites, waste disposal sites. There's places where they brought their waste to legally and otherwise, um, and some things just back in time they didn't have standards, so they just it was just maybe more of a standard
Hmm.
practice, and maybe people knew better, maybe they didn't know any better, but there's lots of different places and lots of got discovered different
Right.
ways.
Well, the map, and I
Yeah.
show this map with in the module, but I'll drop it in our interview, um, from the
Hmm.
EWG site, and it's just amazing, like because obviously in Michigan we're focused on Michigan, and when you look at the map, like Michigan is a hot
Hmm.
state to be focused in, but it's widespread. I mean, and it feels like it's like as the years per
Yeah.
like as each year goes by, we're just finding more sites. Is that accurate? Like, okay,
Hmm.
so we don't even know.
Yeah, and that's true within Michigan. We have 40 sites now where they know for sure
Okay, so
that it's there in a significant issue.
so how quickly are these new sites being discovered? I guess because you're in Michigan, you're working in Michigan, just tell
Yeah.
us like what it like talk to us about what how these are being discovered and then what Michigan is doing about it.
Yeah, so Michigan created, maybe it's a year and a half ago or so, they created an intergovernmental agency called
Mm-hmm.
IMPART. That's the Michigan PFAS Action Response Team, and that's the first in the nation type of team where they really just tried to get their hands around the whole problem of PFAS in Michigan. It's just such a, where do you start? Where do you look? Where do you start testing? And it's the first in the nation, and they've done an amazing amount of work on it. So they're very active. So when we talk about 40 sites, that's because they've been doing the research. They've found them. That's when you hear a new community has something in their water, that's because Impart's out there testing. It's like they're very, very active.
Got it. So other states don't
So they're
have the
they're
same,
doing a lot.
right? So other,
No, this is the first in the nation, and
okay.
that's pretty amazing. So that's why we hear about it
So just
so
because we're
much.
not hearing about it in other states doesn't mean that they're not worse than
Hmm.
us. It's just because we're actually actively testing and finding these spots or these
We're
sites.
way ahead of them. They're going to model their responses off of ours.
Wow. Okay. That's, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I'd rather
yeah,
know. Like, I'd rather know where these are.
yeah,
Okay. Awesome. Keep going.
yeah. So one of the things they've done, and they've done a lot of testing in a lot of different places, but the ones we were focusing on today in the talk is just water
Mm-hmm.
quality. So one thing they've done is they've tested every community supply of water in Michigan. Community supply meaning every community, say every village or city or township, everyone who
Mm-hmm.
shares water from basically a public source.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and they've also tested every daycare and every
Hmm.
school. And there might be a couple that they haven't got to yet, but they're very close, or they finished all
Mm-hmm.
those. Um, and that's pretty amazing. So what we know from that is that 90% of those were non-detect.
Mm-hmm.
So 90% of all the drinking water supplies in Michigan had no PFAS at all, not even those other
I was gonna say,
compounds.
is it the whole
They
fam?
don't test for
Okay.
them all. They test for a range of 14 compounds right now
Okay.
during in the current test. And those are the most common, and also maybe the lab also has ability to test
Mm-hmm.
those too. So they're not, there could be
Mm-hmm.
more, but those are much more than just PFOS and
Mm-hmm.
PFOA. So, and 90% of all systems were non-detect. So, I mean, that's a little bit different than when you hear an M Live and you want to freak out because it's
Mm-hmm.
everywhere. But 9 out of 10 communities don't have any, like at
Mm-hmm.
all. So that's something to know.
Yeah, that is.
The 8% of beyond the 90 had some detections, but they're all very, very, very low. And, for example, of those, that's like the city of Grand Rapids,
Mm-hmm.
Kalamazoo, where they have super low concentrations. And those cities, primarily, a lot of these draw water from the Great Lakes. And the Great Lakes also have these 2 parts per trillion
Mm-hmm.
levels. And so that makes sense. It's in the Grand Rapids wastewater or Grand Rapids drinking
Mm-hmm.
water, things like that. Um, and then there's also there's only one community in all of Michigan that they discovered that had concentrations over 70, which is the EPA health recommendation,
Okay.
and that's in parchment. And so when they discovered parchment, again, you hear endless, stories about that too, but that they were quickly switched over to a different supply of water. So, it paid off to do all this study, and they found and there was one elementary school too that was over 70. So, yeah, they've done a lot of work to decide who has it, who not, and what percentage. And that stuff is also all available too on the Impart website.
Okay.
So you can go there, you can type in your city you live in, and you could know exactly what the concentrations
You
are.
know, Rachel, do you want to post that? I pulled that up earlier today just because I wanted to know how to say the acronym. I'm like, is it called MPART?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
if you just look up MPART and you can post it. I didn't dig around. Hey, welcome, Carly. You're just in time. You're totally fine. I didn't dig around too much, but I thought it was the first time I had heard about it. That we had this, that we were actually really, really. I wouldn't say, I mean, it's still reactive, but still we're doing something. Like we're actively doing something to be the leader on this front. So that's pretty cool. And then you guys, you can type in your own to get your summer results. So I'm super curious too, if there is anybody that's listening live or on the replay who is outside of Michigan, and I would love for you to share like what's happening in your state, or what, if you've been seeing this on the news, like what you're seeing. And I think what's just really fascinating is just drawing the connection that even though Michigan looks so bad, that's also because we're looking. So just really making sure, making note of that, just because we're not seeing it maybe so much other places, well, maybe they just haven't looked. So I really like that. So, okay.
Actually, could I get one more thing
Yeah,
in real
do it.
quick?
Yeah, I'm looking at where we're going next. So,
All right. Okay. Yeah. Another way to view it is that of the 10 million people or so in Michigan, 80% are drinking PFAS-free water.
mm.
So that's
Would you say PFAS free
that's
water, or PFAS like, or
yeah,
or
without
without
any.
any?
Yeah, and so that's make you feel a little bit better too that, 4 out of 5 of us don't have any in the water at all.
Mm-hmm.
And the ones that do, it's probably very, very little. So that means that means there is 2 million people or so in Michigan with small amounts, and those are from the drinking water that is maybe Grand Rapids or so, where they just have such tiny, tiny amounts. But it is there, and that's a decent number of people if you count up a couple of these smaller, medium-sized
Yeah.
cities and you add them together.
And we talked about this briefly, and I like, who decides
Hmm.
the safe amounts, and are they
Mm,
truly safe amounts? I mean, do we know that,
yeah,
like, you know, what level is safe? So just share a little bit about like how that's decided, and what your thoughts are.
yeah, yeah. So the way that those are determined is usually by toxicologists, and they'll look at endless number of studies, and they have to make a lot of
Mm-hmm.
assumptions. They have to look at average intake, and they will compare it to mice and rats and other animals, and it's a very complicated thing. And I'm not a toxicologist, so I really
Right,
can't
right.
go
Yeah,
into all the details that they
right.
make. But we currently, Michigan has a standard of
Yep,
70 of, and that's just for PFOS and
yep.
PFOA, and that basically came from the EPA, who has a recommended um, drinking water value, and um, you know whether that is too high or not. Um, I don't have enough information, but what I do know is that Impart came out with the article, not an article, they did a scientific advisory that was about 80 pages long. And that was from all the recommendations for the past year of studying every community. They also studied a lot too. They studied the wastewater treatment plants, because remember, it's a life
Right.
cycle. It doesn't just stop at the drinking water. These are called the forever chemicals, and they
Mm,
don't break
like
down. So
literally forever. You mean
yeah, so they're,
like forever, forever.
yeah,
Oh my gosh. Okay.
yeah, like to destroy them is, you know, very difficult. You can destroy them in an incinerator, but a wastewater treatment plant doesn't take them
Mm-hmm.
out. It just, they just, once they're out there in the wild, they're just, it's like Jurassic Park. They're free.
Mm-hmm.
Nature will find a way. So
Wow.
they're, but what, Impart says is that 70 is probably too
Mm-hmm.
high. But as for an actual number, I don't know.
Okay. Well, I just noticed, and we talked about it briefly, that there, and you had said, that's not
Hmm.
my thing, but I also know that like you're passionate about this on many levels. So I'm just thinking like on different states, they have these different safe ranges. So I think that's just really good to know.
Hmm.
Like this is the baseline. And then for our fiercely empowered mamas to just tune into like what feels good to them, like does that feel safe to them, or do they want,
Yeah.
literally zero? Okay. So let me
Yeah.
see where we're at
Right.
in our questions. Let's see.
Hmm.
Okay, so we talked about examples of which communities have PFAS in West Michigan. And then what about, so yeah, so where can FEMS go to see the level of PFAS in their water or their city's water supply?
Yeah. So if you go to the Impart website and click
Oh,
on,
that's what you just said? Oh, no, this is
yeah,
testing.
yeah,
Okay.
that's one thing I said,
Yeah.
but yeah. Oh, so for
Yeah,
testing,
for testing.
if you were on a city's water supply, your results would be on the Impart's website. But if you're on an individual private well,
Yeah.
now you're kind of need to decide if you want to have your water tested or not.
Yep.
And so there would be some reasons why you would want to have your water tested. Um, and that might be because you're in an area that you suspect, because you maybe you're near one of those 40 sites. Now,
Mm-hmm.
if you're near a 40 site that Michigan knows about, they'll test for you. But maybe they're not getting there quick enough for you, or maybe you're just outside of their range where they're going to start with the closest houses. They're going to move out.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to do it logically and reasonably. But um, you might want to get yours tested because you're close enough, or you're curious. Maybe you're near a airport. Airports are kind of notorious for having this.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the company I work for, Fleece and Van and Brink, what we'll see is every time there's a new site pop up, and there's 40 of them, and a couple months ago there's only 30 of them. So every time there's a
Mm-hmm.
new site in Michigan, especially in West Michigan, we end up getting quite a bit of calls. We've done over 300 residential samples.
Mm-hmm.
And usually those are people, when you hear something new on the news and people in that area decide they want to get their well tested, they'll call.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with that said, there's about three different ways to get your water tested, and I'll just go over them
Yeah, let's do
briefly
it.
just to give them options, because the first one is calling a professional like us. This is the most expensive option, costs about $860, and that includes us coming out and sampling. Now, when you sample for PFAS, there's a lot of precautions you have to take, and for us, it starts about 48 hours ahead of time because you got to be careful not to contaminate your sample while you're collecting your
Mm-hmm.
sample. And that's because PFAS is everywhere. It's in a lot of we can go over these
Yeah,
later, but it's so prevalent that we have to change what we eat and what we do before we go
it's
sample to make sure
crazy.
we don't contaminate our samples. And so that's something that if you get a professional who can do it, they've been sampling contamination for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
They know what it means, and then you'll get your results letter, and then you'll get a summary,
Mm-hmm.
or we'll summarize the information. So that's the benefit of that. You could also have labs will sometimes do it, or water quality or water treatment system providers can also
Mm-hmm.
sample it, and those will be a little bit cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and their business model is just a little bit different. They're happy to sample your water because you might need
Mm-hmm.
a filter
Mm-hmm.
for it, and so I think that's totally valid
Absolutely.
service that they
Yep.
provide. So that's a different option as well. And they'll probably recommend their
Mm-hmm.
filters. Um, and so that's the strength and drawback of that one
Mm-hmm.
too. The last thing someone can do is they can sample their own water for a little over $200. Um, there's instructions on Impart's website that show you how to be careful to not contaminate your own
Mm-hmm.
sample. And if you could follow those instructions, you could probably take your own sample as well and send it in.
Wow.
So,
Okay, so then
yeah.
for the people on this call that are listening that have a private well, that are not next
Hmm.
to a known contamination site, what would you recommend that they do? Would you
Yeah.
recommend that they move forward with still getting a sample and tested?
It it might be up to them. I'm doing my own, even though I'm in the
Mm-hmm.
country, and that's just more of a
Yeah,
curiosity thing. I don't have my results back yet. I am not near anything that I would think would cause me to have
right.
contamination. But I feel better having my own done. But I don't think, based upon when we hear things like 90% of all the public drinking water wells that were tested don't have anything, I'm thinking that most of the groundwater is not contaminated with PFAS. So um, I think it's likely if you're in an area, you might want to get it sampled if you're bordering some of these known areas or suspected areas. There's a lot of different types of suspected
Mm-hmm.
areas, but each site is a little bit different and specific, and especially if they want to sample it themselves, it's not that expensive, or if they want to have someone do it, it could make sense. And I think that most people probably end up with non-detect results unless they're nearby a significant area.
Now, how often, because we're obviously still learning about it and the labs are only testing the 14 ones, right? Like, okay, let's say that we
hmm
tested negative this year. Like, how often would you recommend
Mm.
getting it tested?
Yeah, so I think it would depend on where you're located. That's a
Mm,
really good question. We sample in the Rockford area nearby one of the release points, and there's a lot of houses in the area who are non-detect. There's nothing there,
hmm
and we sample them for 4 quarters, and most of the time there's still nothing there. Um, so usually, but right next door there might be somebody who's over
mm,
70, and it's just because the wells. So if you're in an area, you might consider it getting sampled once a year. If
hmm
you if you're in Rockford and you have a well and you're near that source area, maybe it's a once a year
hmm
thing. I can't say that's the right number for you. It could be.
hmm
Um, but I would say that once is probably not enough, and you know, many, many times in a row might be too many
hmm
times. And but some people's their wells are at different depths.
hmm
Some neighbors might have two different depths and different geology, and one of them should maybe sample their well more frequently than the next because they might be in the same aquifer as there are contaminants.
hmm
So hopefully
So,
that gave you a little bit of
yeah.
a vague enough answer to
y-
cover everybody.
Well, I think one of the things I'm gonna get you to stop playing with your things. I'm like, is it me or is it you?
Oh, sure.
It's just a little bit of scratching.
Didn't notice.
So when one of the things that I hear from like clients, or they'll say like, I have a really deep well, so I'm safe. But I feel like you and I had
hmm
talked about that before. Like, that's not necessarily true, right?
Right. It depends on the geology um, of what's going on. If you have a clay layer, it can protect
Mm.
you sometimes, but maybe other times it won't protect you because it's not thick enough, or just the way the geology lays. I mean, some of these city wells um, who had impacts, there's some, you know, PFAS can go far and wide. It repels water.
Mm-hmm.
And so what it does when you get it into the water tables, it just
Mm.
flies. It just
Mm-hmm.
keeps on. Once it's out, it just
Mm.
goes and goes and goes.
So
And
interesting.
it can go in, it can go deep or it could go far. It just depends on the geology. And with our glacial geology around the state, it's really a very complex geology.
Right. Wow. Okay. So we're like on our last question, and then there's tons of questions. Well, not tons, but there's several questions that have came in from our femmes. So here. I think this is our wrapping it up question. Like, how else can we avoid the PFAS? And are we being exposed to this from other sources besides drinking water? So I think this is where like people's minds are going to be
Yeah,
blown because it's not just our water.
yeah, yeah, that's it. So, it can be in a lot of other places. So what we know is that they've done studies nationwide where they found that there is PFAS and PFOS and PFOA in people's blood. And it's 98% of all people in the United States have it in their blood. That's the so
So,
that's what we know.
mhm,
And we also know that 90% of the groundwater and vast majority of people's drinking water doesn't have it. So where is it
right.
coming from? That's the
Yep.
question. So if it's not the groundwater, it's not the
hmm
water, it's coming from someplace else. So let's go through a couple categories real quick. I don't have all the answers, but something I did want to point out though is just that I think we have to a little bit be accepting that we're in the modern age, that there is some amount of contaminants that we just can't
hmm
avoid, and it's just we live in these amazing houses. We have clothes that keep us dry, and we have firefighting foam. With a plane ever crashed, they would spray it, and the fire would be out right away.
hmm
And there's so many benefits, but with those, there's a little bit of accepting that we can't get away from it all.
hmm
So, um, not being fearful, because it doesn't really do any good to be fearful. So just a little bit of knowledge to stay away from some of these impacts
hmm
and not being fearful. And a lot of these recommendations too that I'll have, because your listeners are who they are. they're probably already doing a lot of
Hmm.
these things, and it won't necessarily change their lives because by seeking to live a healthy life, you almost inherently avoid a lot of these other
Hmm.
sources of PFAS without even realizing
That's
it.
amazing.
So, number one on the list I have is food-related items. Um, non-stick pans. You remember those pans that the Teflon
Mm-hmm.
lined pans
Oh yeah.
and so those are actually that non-stick is another great feature of
Hmm.
PFAS. So we really want to avoid those non-stick pans because anything that comes in direct contact with food are, I think, one of the highest sources of PFAS we can get in our body.
It's funny. I remember seeing something on the Teflon pans, and it was like Teflon pans are totally safe if they're never heated. And it's like, what do people do with it? They're they're cooking their
Yeah,
food with it, you know?
yeah,
But I totally grew up with those kinds of pans. I think, I
yeah.
mean,
I
it's
know.
and for the people that are using them, I mean, when I shifted when I guess it was when we got married and I had shifted to stainless steel and doing cast iron, like it was a hard shift. Like you weren't used to cleaning pans, you know, and scrubbing pans or soaking them.
Yep.
So it's like, but now it's second nature. Like I wouldn't even think of anything else, but it's like it's easy. Like if you have a nonstick pan, I mean, it makes cooking so easy, but you're also contaminating your food in really big ways. So,
Yeah. So if you can avoid that, you're doing good. Like I said, stainless steel or cast iron or
mm-hmm,
alternatives.
mm-hmm,
Um, Food packaging, there's other ones that we should avoid. Microwave popcorn bags.
mm-hmm,
So there's any sort of food packaging that is oil or grease
mm,
resistant. So a lot of fast food
mm,
wrappers, again, they've been treated to so your cheese from your hamburger doesn't stick to it.
mm-hmm,
And so that contaminates your
mm-hmm,
food and we eat
mm-hmm.
it. So again, I think that most people are living healthier and trying to avoid um, microwave popcorn and going out to eat to fast food restaurants.
But
So
I think it's so powerful to
you know,
draw the connection though, because it's like even greater than the food, right? Like now we're also dealing with these
yeah,
other compounds that we're not quite sure what they're doing to our systems. So if somebody's one splurge was microwave baked popcorn, that's enough, you know, right? To like convince them like, okay, like it's not that hard to make it on the stovetop, which it's really not. It's so easy, you guys, if you've never done that before. You just
hmm
need lots of butter and it cooks beautifully, or coconut oil.
yeah. Um, so that's the food related items, and then I have food on my list here. So PFAS might be used in pesticides and
Mm,
herbicides to apply it. And so they're still doing a lot of studies, but it may be in food. It's also in biosolids that might be applied to a farm field. And so um, I think, eating organic or even though, yeah, so organic or getting from a
mm-hmm,
CSA, we have a nice CSA, Full Hollow Farm, and we're still getting a winter CSA right
mm,
now. And there's just vegetables in there, and they're the winter vegetables, but they're not putting a packaging around
right,
them, and I know their
right,
practices, and so I feel pretty comfortable that they're, you know, far less PFAS than anything else I would buy from the
right,
store, even organic that's wrapped in organic
right.
shrink wrap wrapper. Like I don't, I'm not sure that the information is out there. We don't know all the information yet about where all the wrapping is and what's in the
You know,
wrapper.
I bought, you know, the organic cucumbers are just so amazing, like taste so much better, but they are wrapped in that plastic. And I was thinking about that the other day. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
okay,
Yeah.
these are wrapped in plastic. I don't know, you know, what does that say? Like, it's just so interesting everywhere we look.
Yeah. The next thing is fish. A lot of people in Michigan like to fish, but there's 5 water bodies that are have do not eat limits because of PFAS in the water. So do not eat the fish from certain, up to 5 water bodies. And one of those is in the Rockford Dam
Mm.
in Rockford.
And so, are we like we've tested all the water bodies, so we know that there's just these like main five right now?
They're getting
Okay.
it. I mean, like I said, it's the first in the nation. We don't know if they tested every
Yeah.
water body. everywhere. And it's not just the water body, it's also the fish that they're
Yeah.
testing. But there is at least five
Yeah.
notices out for PFAS for
Yeah. I
fish.
mean, we talk a lot about fish just in other reasons too, the atrazine, the glyphosate,
Mm,
the metals, like there's
right.
like poor fish. It's so hard.
Yeah, it's really in the
Yeah.
drinking water is really tough. Personal care products. When we go out sampling, there's a list of what personal care products not to use while you're
Hmm.
sampling.
Can you?
There's certain ones that have, yeah, I can't remember any brand names, but there is some brand names have been tested. But in general, they're used for a lot of things: cosmetics, lotions, sunblock, bug spray, shampoo, hair conditioners, cosmetics. So again, I think if you're buying organic or you're buying somebody who cares what they put in their product,
Hmm.
you're okay. The other thing too is that these dermal contacts are not expected to be as harmful as your when you eat something, it comes into your body itself. So if it gets on your skin, it's not quite as
Hmm.
bad. The same amount getting inside of you would be way
Hmm.
worse. So, these would be much less of a risk, but they're probably something to
Yeah.
avoid if you're trying to get rid of all PFAS.
I mean, how do you find
Um,
it on a label?
oh, it won't
Yeah,
be on
I
the
was gonna
label.
say, like it's basically
It might
okay.
be,
Would
but
it literally say PFAS or would it say the long version of it?
no, it would. It might. I'm not
Okay.
sure what they would say. If it's less than 2% of a product, I don't
Right.
think that has to be listed. I'm not sure
Yeah.
or if it's proprietary, it doesn't have to be
Right.
listed.
Yeah, there's so many loopholes.
Yeah.
So, like, just again, making those
Mm,
conscious choices of choosing where, like, knowing who we're buying our stuff from. Okay.
yeah. Um, Certain flosses, they determined
Hmm.
the flosses, especially the Oral-B
Yep.
brands, the reason why they glide so well through your teeth, that they're got PFAS on them, and they're one of the highest sources of PFAS in your house.
I I saw that and I could not even believe it. I'm like, here we are freaking out about the
Yeah,
water and this Oral-B dental
yeah.
floss, is the highest amount. Like,
And they've done studies of women who have, who floss their teeth and who don't, and it's like it's higher in the ones who do, and you're like, I thought I was doing something
right.
good.
Ugh, yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm. Raise your hand if you've been using the Oral-B.
yeah,
Just curious. It does slide nice.
I have.
Guilty.
Um,
Uh,
yeah. You can use a waxed
hmm.
alternative.
Yep.
There's other
Hmm.
options. Um, clothing is the
Hmm.
next one. They say that 50% of all PFAS used worldwide is used in clothing. So, for testing, the DEQ at Impart says you should wash your new clothing 6 times before you go
Hmm.
sample.
Yeah.
So, I don't think that's a very scientific number. I don't know where they got that number from, 6 times,
Yeah.
but
I've seen that so many times,
yeah,
and it's like, it just seems so unrealistic because you're breaking down your clothes. Um, but I've seen that, like, not just for the PFAS, but for other contaminants in the clothing. I mean, we are literally putting it
yeah,
on our skin. It's crazy.
yeah. The ones that are the worst are waterproof clothing.
Mm-hmm.
So the things that make it fun to go outside when it's
Mm-hmm.
raining, um, umbrellas, your jackets, your waterproof pants, your waterproof shoes, the and um, and so again, your durable contact is not that
Right.
high. It's not that high of a risk from touching those. It's really that you might touch them and then you might lick your
Mm-hmm.
fingers for some
Mm-hmm.
reason. So I think that's just don't lick
Right.
your fingers after you touch your
Right.
raincoat, or just wash your hands,
Right.
or I you get so many benefits from going
Mm-hmm.
outside, and you don't want to be wet going outside.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just minimizing that
Mm-hmm.
risk, I
Yeah.
think.
Crazy.
Yeah. Carpet and
Mm-hmm.
upholstery. Carpets get treated with um, some sort of stain block, and that stain block is PFAS, and that's what repels oil and
Mm-hmm.
grease from staining your carpets. I saw an ad the other day for a kid-proof couch when I was driving around, and
Yeah.
that's just code name for
Yep.
PFAS.
Sure is.
Yeah,
Wow.
like, and they'll say the biggest source for kids, toddlers of PFAS is carpets,
Mm-hmm.
and that's because they're crawling around them and they're putting their hands in
Yep.
their mouth.
Yep.
And so I think buy a new carpet, you can request it not to be
Mm-hmm.
treated, and otherwise they say vacuuming removes some of the PFAS that broke free of the
Mm-hmm.
carpet. So if you vacuum, you're better off than not vacuuming at all. I guess that's intuitive.
Yeah.
And maybe washing your hands more frequently if you were touching the carpet and it was treated.
Did you say something when we talked previously about just getting your carpet cleaned?
Well, it's also in
Okay.
cleaners. So if we don't know what your cleaners have in them, then all sorts of cleaning products
Mm-hmm.
have it in it as well. So I think if we do the same thing again, we use baking soda and
Right.
vinegar, and we use other natural
Mm-hmm.
products and essential oils, and then we're cleaning with those or just water.
Mm-hmm.
That might be. Again, it doesn't say it on the
Right.
ingredient list, so you really don't
Mm-hmm.
know. But that's where we're at.
Is that your list? Is that your complete list?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I think that's my
All right,
list.
let's hit up the questions. Let me scroll through and see what I'm seeing. Okay.
Do you know what
Oh
time it
yeah.
is?
Do you have to run? It's 1:56.
I have until 2, or I could push off my next meeting for 10 to
Let's
15
just see if
minutes.
we've
I
already.
just need to send a quick email.
Um, do you mind? Can you hang with us for another 10 minutes?
No.
Are you sure?
Yeah, let me
Okay.
send an email while
Okay.
you're looking at
Let
your
me do that.
questions, let me just let them know I'll be late.
All right. Thank you. All right. So if you guys have more questions, he's going to hang out with us for 10 more minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and pull your questions now. Let's see how I want to do this. Rachel, if you want to, it's so hard for me to see it this way. Oh, you know what? I can see it this way. Never mind. I'm good. Okay. So I want to find.
Well, that was easy.
Yay! Perfect. Thank you so much. So one of the first
Yeah.
questions is from Salka, and she said, "Can you recommend an under the sink water filter for drinking water?" So I don't know how far you want to go into like, can you recommend? I always recommend the RS, doing reverse osmosis. If possible, doing a Berkey, but sounds like she wants something under the sink. So
Mm.
feel free to share what you would suggest.
Yeah, so if you're looking for something that removes PFAS, just going to the
Oh yeah.
conversation. Hi, Solka,
Yeah.
by the way. But you would want to go to, if you go to Impart, they'll have a link again to the National Science NSF. And what you want is a NSF certified filter. And these are ones that have been through the process where they've been documented and tested and they do remove PFAS. Um, there's a lot of other filters that have not been through that testing process. It's a very rigorous testing process. So there's probably, dozens on there, I believe, of under the sink ones that have tested to remove PFAS. So those are either reverse osmosis
Mm-hmm.
or they could be activated carbon.
Mm-hmm.
Under the sink ones, they run in the hundreds of dollars range, and there probably any of those from that list would work. Things to consider are um, how fast it comes out. You might be there for a little while it fills up your glass of water.
Mm-hmm.
For the cheaper
Do
ones.
you recommend people doing it themselves, or do you recommend having, like a water service company that's specializing in, specializing in,
Yeah.
I don't know, removing all contaminants. I mean, what I understood, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is
Yeah.
if we're removing PFAS,
Hmm.
we're removing other man-made chemicals because PFAS is the hardest
Hmm.
to remove. So if we're removing that, we're able to remove everything else that we don't want to be drinking. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's probably a reasonable salute
Okay.
estimate. I don't know if they backed up those filters by saying they can remove every other
Mm,
man-made chemical, but that would be reasonable that that would be a decent guess
Well, from what I understand,
without having all the data to
like
back it
if
up.
PFAS is so
Yeah,
small, like such a like,
yeah,
but the other ones are bigger.
yeah.
Like that's how I understood it in my mind. Um, so
Hmm.
okay, so back to the question then. Uh, would you recommend people
Yeah.
doing it themselves or reaching out to a company?
I guess it depends on how handy they
Hmm.
feel they are. Um, I think that those things are something you could do by yourself if you feel handy and you have a good grasp on your water
Hmm.
quality, things like that. So, let's say your only contaminant of concern is PFAS and you want to buy one of those filters. I think and you're on city water. Um, because maybe you're in Grand Rapids or something and you want to remove it from 3 parts per trillion down to zero,
Hmm.
or at least below detection limits. We
Right.
don't really, they're going to remove a lot of it. So, I think that's something you could do yourself. But if you wanted to pay someone, I don't think it would be a huge expense for them to do it, for their time and effort. It would be pretty simple for them as well. What I'm concerned about is people who are on wells who might have hard
Hmm.
water, who might have iron
Yep.
water, who might have a complicating
Yep.
factor. And at that point, you might want to get someone over there who could tell you how hard your water is, how that might choose a different system if they knew that you had different type of
Right.
water.
Yeah. So a follow-up question to this is what options are available to filter shower and bath water in an apartment? So we've been talking about drinking
Yeah,
water, but also what about bathing in this water?
yeah. So, couple things. So again, the dermal exposure is expected to be minimal compared to the oral ingestion of it. So if you're bathing in it, it's not supposed to be as bad. And I'm not sure how many studies are out on that, but it's not supposed to be as bad as
Can I
drinking
ask
it.
a quick question? When you say that, are you
Hmm.
speaking specifically to PFAS, or do you mean this in general to
Yeah,
chlorine and
specifically,
fluoride and other?
specifically towards
Okay.
PFAS.
Okay.
I mean, it might be true for some
Okay.
other things, and it might not be true for
Okay.
some other things, but specifically towards PFAS, it's not expected to go through your skin as easily as if you
Okay.
drank
That's
it.
really good to know. Okay.
So for an apartment, you might need, well, I guess if you're in an apartment, you might be on a city
I think
water.
she is.
And so if you're on a city water, I think definitely if you're concerned about having PFAS getting, under the sink filter, maybe for what you're drinking is the most important thing. And otherwise, you're looking at a whole house filter. Whole house filters are jumping into the thousands of dollar range, and I don't believe there are any certified filters for that,
Okay.
in SF. So you can't just go to the website and say, "Hey, I'd like to have one of those." But a lot of the local water treatment companies are very experienced in this area now in Rockford
Hmm.
area. Part of what my company does is we help cities and counties and other people sample, and we've also um, looked at installing some of these filters, and we outsource the installation of them to these local companies. And so I've seen numerous in-house whole house filters, and they're usually kind of substantial. They're big carbon
Hmm.
tanks usually, and they do take out quite a bit of PFAS. And so the question is, does it um, every once in a while you'll have to replace the carbon in them,
Hmm.
and it will probably last her for quite a while, depending on the size. They could size them for her and everything, but I'd have her give one of those companies a
Okay.
call.
And that's for an apartment
There's
too.
there's numerous ones. They would do a whole house, so
So when you say whole house, I think of,
or
okay,
apartment. Well, so yeah, so it's a question of would the apartment
right,
people let her mess with
right,
their, the
right.
pipes.
So it seems like a temporary solution, maybe doing some under the counter. And then do they make, because I know they have, like shower filters for chlorine and fluoride. Do they have shower, like snap-on filters?
I don't know,
Okay,
and they're probably not
right.
certified if they
And from
are.
what I understand is you kind of burn through
Yeah.
it pretty quickly, right? Like,
Yeah, you would have to replace the filters once it gets filled up.
yeah,
And it can get filled up with other things too
right,
besides PFAS,
right, right.
so.
So Laura, I will send some options for shower filters for the other contaminants, like specifically, like we don't want to be bathing in chlorine, but
Yeah.
I don't know about what we're going to do
Hmm.
about the PFAS. So we will look up those filters too, the NSF filters. So, all right, let's see. I think we just had a couple more questions. All right. So, so Carly asked too how bathing and showering in the PFAS contaminated water affects us. And from what you understand in the studies that you've seen, it is less
Yeah.
than drinking it. We want to be more concerned about drinking it
Yeah.
and eating it than having it touch our skin. Okay.
Yeah. Especially if you're in a community that's very, 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 very low or non-detect, that would be different than bathing in a, you know, very, very, very high
Right.
impacts, but that would be very
Okay.
rare that you would have.
And then Saka asked too, are the tests only testing for PFAS or other chemicals? And I think that's a great question because from what I understand is that there's two different panels of
Hmm.
tests. Like you would want to get one test for other chemicals and then there's just the straight up PFAS test that we're doing. So it's two tests, right? Okay.
Yeah, so there are probably endless number of things you could
Okay.
test for in your drinking water. Somebody who lived on nearby a golf course the other day contacted us, and she asked what we recommended, and we gave her a list, and I think it was about 10 different things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, PFAS, so there's 14
Yep.
on the list for PFAS, and then there are some metals, herbicides, and pesticides. And I think we also had some petroleum compounds on there too because of the possible fill in the landfill. So we went out there and sampled. Ended up, she had very low detections of PFAS.
It almost sounds like
So everything else was fine.
if it, if somebody's in a chronic health state, it almost feels like your company, it would be worth paying the extra money for your company to come out. It just seems like it's more well-rounded than maybe having a water service provider do it. Or is that not true?
I think it makes sense for a lot
Yeah.
of people. Maybe not everyone. I think if you're very con budget oriented, I think maybe doing it yourself.
Yeah.
But if I think just to get a perspective or to get a summary of what the results are, be able to talk to somebody who deals with contamination on a
Right.
daily basis, and I think that would be useful for a certain amount of
But with the
people.
water companies that are doing this, and they're doing it as like an incentive
Hmm.
at a lesser rate because they know that you're going to buy the filter, is their
Hmm.
testing as
Yeah,
comprehensive? Are they looking at the same things? I mean, are
yeah.
they just as much in the thick of it like you guys are, or is it more surface level?
I think now that they're gonna have the same
Okay.
lab results and the same lab
Okay.
tests. So yeah, they've been doing it in the area for long enough where they know which labs to use, they know which analysis
Okay.
to run. Um, the question is, if you want anything else run, they'll be happy to run it
Yeah.
for you. But you might be requesting it, and they might not be able to think about what other
Right.
reasonable things you would have in the
So,
area.
from your
They're
perspective, you're looking at the whole area and you're thinking about what could possibly be impacting their water, and then you're pulling up that list of things and making sure that you cover it in the test.
That is what a couple people requested when they said for PFAS, and they're like, what else
Yeah.
would you test for? And they would ask
Yeah.
us what we would test
Okay.
for. And this does happen, and I'd say people who just want PFAS is just like that's
Yeah.
what's in the news, that's
Yeah.
all they want. That's what they're doing. If you want us to run a couple other things while we're there, we're already there. We can just throw some
Yeah.
extra water and some extra bottles, and
Yeah.
it doesn't take that much more. It's just a lab cost at that point because our time is already we're already
Right.
there.
Yeah. I think that would just be so fitting for those who are in chronic health states and really want to know what's in their water, what's around them.
Yeah,
Okay.
makes sense.
So, and then two, let's see. Carly asked, let me see if I understand. Do they share info on where they test on their website as in someone already tested? Oh, yeah. So she's asking, so all those test results in the areas are on that MPART website, right?
All the city and state, or all the city and village and township, all the public water results are on that
So if you
website.
have a well water, then it's not on that website.
No, most likely
Okay.
not.
So Carly, you
There are other maps.
okay.
available if you have to poke around quite a bit, and eventually you can find
Is
something.
that all on the Empart website?
No, that's those are just various
Oh, okay.
maps that are
Okay.
around.
So Carly, oh, go
Some,
ahead.
no, if she's in the Rockford area, there are some maps that don't show addresses or locations or anything that just show little dots on a map, and you can kind of guess if you're in that area or not.
Okay. Perfect. All right. I think that is all. Oh, okay.
Hmm.
One, we need to let you go. Oh, yep, we already asked that. Okay, we did it. It's 2:10. Thank you
All
so
right.
much for doing this with us. I just so appreciate you and sharing this expertise with us. So thank you, thank you, thank you from all of us.